So I want to thank everyone for participating today. We've got a few people from Capital and, of course, dealers. I'm Lee Crocum. I'm from Capital Sales. We have Ryan Harder here this morning to talk about Luxul's Epic Mesh and ProWatch. If you have any questions, please post them in the question box, and we'll take as much time as needed at the end of the webinar to answer any of your questions.
All right, awesome. Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone is doing well today and dealing with the the holiday season. It's always an exciting time, maybe a little different this year for a lot of us, and but hopefully everyone gets to sort of enjoy it to the extent that they can. As Lee said, my name is Ryan Harder, originally from the Luxul training team. Of course, kind of expanding into Legrand AV with our integration into this organization. Today, like Lee said, we're going to be talking about really just two things. Please, if you have a question, do not hesitate to ask. There's no question that is bad. If it's something that I said that you don't understand, or maybe I didn't clarify on, or I need to clarify on, please ask, because that's ultimately this is your time. So let's make sure that you all get the most out of it. Okay. So we'll really just jump right in. We're just talking about two things today. Two new products to launch this year, or a product and a service, I guess. Our Epic Mesh product. This was something that we talked about for, oh gosh, I mean, by the time it actually did launch and we were selling it, I mean, we were talking about this for about a year. And we had several sort of production pushbacks and things like that I'm sure you guys are all aware of. This is a highly anticipated product. But we are shipping it now. We want to make sure that we kind of cover the basics here. So first off, what is mesh, right? There's been sort of it's kind of a term that's been thrown around in a few different ways. I've heard people refer to Luxul's controller and access point system as a mesh, which isn't necessarily correct, I wouldn't say. But I know the term kind of gets thrown around a lot, and maybe some people are a little confused about what it is. Essentially, what mesh is it's a system of access points being connected to each other. Generally speaking, this term is used to talk about access points that connect to each other, or gain their access or their network connectivity rather, via a wireless signal, right, from another access point or from another mesh node. Okay. We'll talk a little bit about some differences and some things that maybe we do, and hardwiring is maybe one of those things that can be different. But essentially, most of the time, people are talking about a collection of access points, or usually in mesh they're called nodes, that connect up to each other via a Wi-Fi signal, so you do not have to run an Ethernet cable, okay, to each of those locations. Now, the second part of this, and probably honestly the most important part for the definition, is that you have a self-organizing and self-healing system. So essentially, you can see here, I don't know how large my pointer is, or if you guys can see it very well, but if you take that mesh node that's kind of at the top in the center, and let's say that guy is connected to the one just to the right of it, okay, and that guy is connected just to the one just to the right of that, the one that has the Ethernet cable running into it, okay, and this guy all the way out here on the far left is connecting to this center, I'll call it that top center node. If for some reason this top center node stops working, maybe somebody flips a breaker, that side of the house loses power, somebody accidentally unplugs this piece, whatever, this guy, the one on the far left, now is going to automatically say, okay, well, I see that I just lost my connection, and I'm going to look and see if there's any way that I can get back to the network, back on the network, and get everything connected back up. And if the signal strength from this guy on the right is strong enough, the one on the edge of the network here on the far left will find that and will reconnect and automatically sort of reassociate itself with the network. It's not going to lose any settings, nothing's going to change there. But the reason why this is important is that now I only have one section of this home or of this building that doesn't have a Wi-Fi signal that's really very usable anymore. I still have maintained it here, and of course from that head end unit. Okay. So when should you be using mesh versus a standard AP? So in general, I'm going to go ahead, pull those up. In general, I'm going to tell you from a networking standpoint, you don't want to just go to all of your jobs from here on out or sell to all of your dealers from here on out. Hey, mesh is the future. There's no need to use standard APs that require an Ethernet cable anymore. Just do mesh and, let's just bin everything else. So part of the reason for that is, Wi-Fi is difficult, as I'm sure a lot of you know through experience. Wi-Fi is not the same everywhere, and there are times when things outside of your control affect your Wi-Fi within a specific space, and sometimes that's it's building materials, and sometimes it's something entirely different. If you live near somewhere, maybe maybe there's a research lab, maybe there is. I've known people who live somewhat near, military bases and things of that nature, where they are sending out certain, radio frequencies and things like that to communicate to whatever it is they're trying to communicate to, and that affects that that wave, that frequency that they're putting out 2 miles away, 3 miles away, is affecting everybody around them in their Wi-Fi. But they also don't really care. It's not their problem. So just bear in mind, when you use mesh, you are relying a lot more on Wi-Fi in general, because now not only are all of your Wi-Fi devices Wi-Fi, of course, your network backbone kind of is, right? Because your mesh nodes are all connecting via Wi-Fi as well. So bear that in mind. When you're dealing with, anytime that you're dealing with a situation where you cannot pull wire somewhere, a retrofit application where it just isn't really feasible to get cable run from point A to point B to point C to point D, these are a great option. And usually you're gonna want to talk about more simple networks. I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that we do have and don't have in the mesh here in just a moment, but these are a little bit more limited from a functionality standpoint from like our standard router and our standard access points. So just bear that in mind. Usually, we say, small to medium home, 30 or fewer devices. I also realize that these mesh units are going to be used in all sorts of applications that we wouldn't necessarily recommend up front. But it's something that, that we can maybe try to get done. Just try to keep in mind, try to keep these to smaller applications, more simple networks, things of that nature. If you're looking at versus a standard AP, I'm going to tell you, larger homes, larger networks that have a higher bandwidth requirement, just simply because you have this AP, it's a dedicated device. It has a dedicated, each and every one has a dedicated hard line back to the main network. So of course, that sort of network infrastructure and backbone is stronger from that sense. Obviously, one of our biggest selling points for the last, I guess it's been about 5 years since the controller came out, 4.5 years, something like that, is our active roaming that the wireless controller gives you, right? So that's something else to bear in mind, is that our mesh nodes do not have active roaming like a standard Luxul system that of old that you've seen in the past. So bear that in mind as well, that that's something that you are trading off. You're losing active roaming for the convenience of what mesh is and what it does for you. Okay. If you start to deal with things like automation, video over IP, some of those solutions ask you to do things like VLANs. When you start talking about doing stuff like that, you really, really want to try to go with sort of a traditional system, get a hardwired router, standard APs, things like that. And if you had the chance to pre-wire anything, my recommendation is still to do that, do exactly that. Run cable everywhere and run it where you're not even sure that you will need it, because it, you probably 9 times out of 10 you're going to end up using it. And just with the scope and the way that people's networks are expanding and the growth rate of network connected devices, these IoT devices, it's better to be prepared for sure. And if you can do that by just doing some pre-wiring when you're in like a framing phase, that's awesome. It's much easier for you and much better for the client at the end of the day. So talk about the mesh a little bit as far as exactly, or I guess sort of the two different sort of selling options, okay? And a little bit about the way that they can work, okay? So the MN10 is a single node, okay? Looks just like this. If any of you guys if anybody was at CEDIA Expo last year, not this year, but last year, we did have sort of a hollow box that was sort of, this is what the mesh is going to look like, and it really hasn't changed much. So notice that on that back panel view, you have your power in, okay? So that's something else to bear in mind, is that as of right now, this is a question that inevitably pretty much always comes up. As of right now, these are DC or AC power only. So we don't have a PoE option currently. It's something that we're talking about and trying to work out a way to make that work. I realize that that's another big ask for these. But notice that there are two LAN ports on the back here, and one of them is labeled Internet and LAN 1. So your first node is always going to get plugged in to your modem or your modem router or whatever you have there. You have to have one of them hardwired in so that you have an internet connection coming in the first place. Now that second one, or that second LAN, can be used for any Ethernet device. You can plug in a switch to it. You can whatever you want. Okay. Now that's on your sort of your root or your main node that gets plugged into your modem. Okay. On the remote nodes, okay, if this is one of those, if you think back to the example I showed at the beginning, if this is one of those remote nodes that's connected via wireless, you can actually use either one of those Ethernet ports to plug in a hardwired device. If you have, I don't know, a Blu-ray player that doesn't do Wi-Fi or something like that, you can plug that into one of the LAN ports here or into a switch that's plugged into the LAN port here, and it will have connectivity up to the network, okay? Either one of those ports work just fine. They don't really function any real different unless it is your root node, in which case just make sure you're plugging in your internet connection where it labels internet, okay? I guess it throws all of that on there. So yeah, from your modem to your first node, your modem to your router node or your first node, and then like I said, you can use either on a remote node, you can use either of those LAN ports for whatever you would like. Okay. Obviously, reset button, you're going to see this on all of our equipment, and it's basically the same. If any of you haven't caught on or don't know, that factory reset is the exact same for pretty much everything that we have. Press and hold the reset button for 15 seconds and then let go. Some items do certain things with their lights and then you let go and stuff like that. I found it's just better, count to a good 15 seconds, let go, and that'll factory default the unit there. Okay. Now, I said we would talk a little bit about the backhaul being a little different, or connecting your remote nodes up differently than wireless. You can actually just hardwire these. If you want to do that, they will still have that self-healing, self-organizing sort of tree to them and function that way. All you're doing is giving yourself a little bit better performance, because as we all know, an Ethernet cable is always going to be better than a wireless signal, right? So you can, if you have wire run to a few locations, you can hardwire the ones that you are able to, and then let the rest be wireless. So actually, I'm going to go back to this example real quick. If, let's say, I have wire run to 2 of these locations, these kind of remote locations, but not the third, I can go ahead and hardwire those 2 and be perfectly happy that, hey, I know that those 2 are hardwired. I know I'm going to get a better result out of those. And then I just have one that relies on wireless. Or vice versa, maybe I can only hardwire one, let the other 2 be wireless. I would still say, even if you're using mesh, if you have the opportunity or the ability to hardwire one of them, definitely do. As many of them as you can. I know that's kind of the point most of the time, is that they can be wireless, and if you need them to be wireless, that's what they're designed to do, and that's great. But we kind of give the option because we realize that from a networking perspective, it's just better if you are able to do that. Okay. Like I say, it gives you a more reliable connection there. Okay. Now, something to realize, and probably a few new terms. Maybe some of these are terms that you guys have heard before. So the term wireless backhaul, or the term backhaul. Okay, when you're talking about mesh, you're talking about mesh and backhaul, I guess. You're talking about the way that mesh node connects up to your network. Okay, that's what we kind of mean by backhaul. All right. So when we say wireless backhaul, we're talking about when the mesh node is connected via wireless. Okay, it has a dedicated 5 gigahertz radio. This is a 4x4 multi-user MIMO radio with explicit beamforming. Okay, so that radio its only job is to connect these mesh units together wirelessly. Okay, it's looking for a signal it's looking for a signal from another mesh unit to connect to, or it's broadcasting so something else can connect to it, so another mesh unit can connect to it. So the way that these really work is that you have a 2.4 gigahertz radio, you have a 5 gigahertz radio that's for client connectivity, so it's for your phones, your laptops, your what have you, your TVs, whatever it is that you want to connect. Okay, and then you have another 5 gigahertz radio that only these mesh nodes are able to connect to and are able to see. Okay. We also, something to realize is that the way that the antenna configuration is on this backhaul radio. Okay, so this one it's really built kind of special to allow this connectivity between these devices. The way that it is designed, it does not perform very well if the nodes are in different orientations. Okay, so for this reason, again, another question that comes up often is, hey, can I mount this on the wall? Can I do a wall mount like this? Firstly, we don't have there are no mounting brackets or anything for these units right now. They are basically they're tabletop units, and that's sort of what they're intended to be. Just so that you guys know, I talked a little bit about the PoE option and how that's something we're looking into. To go along with that, we're looking at how can we design an enclosure that would allow us to ceiling mount these units as well. Okay, because I know that that's something else that a lot of you might want to do, or something that your customers are going to want to do. Okay, you're going to want to ceiling mount these things. Right now, we do not have an option. We're working on a solution. We thought we had one, I don't know, a few months back. If any of you had asked the question, you might have even heard, we think we might have something. Turned out that our simple solution is kind of what it was going to be, does not vent enough heat for these units to sit inside and to function properly. So it basically just builds up heat, and then it would end up not being good for that mesh node. So it's something we're still working on, but as of right now, these are tabletop units. So bear that in mind as well. They're not intended to be, there probably will never be any sort of wall mount option because they really are not intended to be, again, because of the build of that antenna array, the design of it, these are not intended to be wall mounted access points. It actually changes the way that they're able to connect to each other, and the way that they're able to shoot the signal up through the floors and things like that. So bear that in mind. These are basically, they're always going to be either they're always going to be horizontal. They're either going to be tabletop, or eventually, if we can come out with the ceiling mount option, that'll be another way to do it. So obviously, the correct way to do this for right now is, hey, make sure that you're in the same orientation. Make sure that you don't have them on kind of a weird surface or weird angle, because that can affect what sort of connection you're getting between these units, and in turn the way that other remote unit functions, because it's not getting as good of a signal. Okay, so just something to bear in mind there. One of the really cool things, or one of my favorite things about this, is that the setup, while we've always tried really hard at Luxul to make setup simple and try to make our user interfaces easy to use and fairly intuitive, it's just not the same as having an app that literally just walks you through every step of the setup process. Okay, so we have our easy setup app. If any of you might have used this on the wireless routers, we've had this out for a couple of years now. It's gone through a few different iterations. It's actually much more reliable. I think it's better looking than when we first put it out, for sure. And it is a little bit more clear on some of the steps. So this is the way that you will set up any mesh system. There is not an option to set up a mesh system through a web browser user interface like you might be used to. Okay. Cool thing is, this is a really, really easy app to download. iOS or Android, go to your App Store or your Play Store. Either way, look for Luxul Easy Setup or Luxul, and you'll find it and be able to download it. It's a small download, so it's pretty simple to do. That will walk you through. It's a 4 to 5 step process, and it's really, really cool because literally the only thing it does is it says, hey, what system are you setting up? And you get an option between the XWR 1200, XWR 3150, and then the mesh. Obviously, with the mesh, you pick that, and then literally all you do is scan the QR code on the bottom of the mesh piece, and it says, okay, great, you're setting that one up. Do you have another one? And then you scan the next one. Okay, great. Do you have another one? And then you scan the next one. Super, super easy. It literally can take just a few minutes. What you can do, or something that I've seen quite a few people do, is kind of get them plugged in, sort of plugged into power at the rack, right? Or wherever your main internet source is coming in, and get them plugged in, power them on, get them all set up. And then literally all you have to do is unplug them and go move them somewhere else. They're not going to lose their settings. They're not going to, nothing like that. So that's something I've seen a few people do. It's a really, really easy process that only takes 2 to 4 minutes, probably at the absolute maximum. Obviously, there's a few things that I'll talk about here in a second, but there are a few things that we do a little differently than a lot of the other mesh products out there. And one of those is that we do have a web user interface. All right, you after you've done your setup, you can go in, you can log into the UI of the mesh units and make changes, right? So, like I said, you can't do this to do the initial setup, but you can go in and make changes. And there are a few different options there that you can see. Guest network, we have the ability to do a guest network. This is not the VLAN setup that maybe, if some of you are used to our other product, this is not the VLAN setup that we normally have. This is like a one-click guest network, which is really nice and really easy. We do give options to do things like port forwarding and I believe VPN as well. We also allow you to do multiple different wireless SSIDs. So anything that you want to change after the initial setup, obviously initial setup will also walk you through setting up your wireless and your password and all of that stuff. But anything that you want to change after the initial setup, including your SSID or your password or anything like that, you can come in here and excuse me, you can come in here and make any changes that you need to make. Okay. Some of the features that I did cover a little bit. Okay, we are allowing up to 8 different SSIDs, so 4 per band. For the dealer, the reason why we did this is that when we were kind of thinking about creating a mesh type of product, we wanted to figure out like what is it that are there things that some of these other mesh products do or don't do that people in our industry might like. So one of the things that came back was, hey, I like to, I go in, I set this, whatever, mesh product X, whatever you call it. I go in and I set it up. And the problem is the end user, I set up, all the AV equipment, the things that I need to help them with that I set up, and, I install maybe a video doorbell, things like that. I get all of that stuff set up on their Wi-Fi. And then my customer goes through and, a month later, 2 months later, decides they don't like their Wi-Fi password and they want to change it. Or they thought of a funny, they saw some funny meme and now they want to change their Wi-Fi SSID, their broadcast. Okay. And so they go and do that. And now all the stuff that I set up for them doesn't function anymore because it's not connected to the network and they don't know how to get some of that stuff reconnected. So now I got to go back out there and I got to help them do all that. And it's a pain. So one of the things I've seen people do with this is, hey, here's an SSID, and password for sort of the end user and their devices and their their computers and TVs and things like that they're going to set up themselves, their phones, all of that. But I can set up a second SSID that's hidden that maybe controls all the things that if I'm the dealer, have gone in and installed for them. All right. So therefore, I make sure that, hey, they can go in and they can change whatever they want on their stuff. If I want them, want to show them how to do that and give them access, it's a little harder to do with our stuff because you don't just do everything through an app. But if they ever want to change that, you don't have to worry about going through and getting all the AV equipment back online and all of that stuff. So that was one of the benefits there. One of the other things that we do is we actually just, when it comes to setup of a network, we found that giving people the ability to choose whatever subnet they want, whether it be 192.168, 1 dot whatever, or 10.1.1. whatever, we found that people didn't want to be limited. So we give full range of subnets. People can do whatever they want. I know a lot of the competition kind of has a list, kind of a preset list where they only have 3 or 4 different options, and at times that can be a pain if you're dealing with I know like AT&T is kind of one of those weird setups where sometimes they don't really have a bridge mode. Sometimes you just kind of have to let it be a router, and it can cause some problems that way if you don't have the correct subnets and IPs set up. So glad that we have that. We do also do static leases and port forwarding. I know that there's a few other options out there that don't do either one of those. A few that maybe do one or the other, a few that maybe do both. So, we kind of wanted this to be really, we're a network company making a network product. And obviously trying to fit the needs of our users and make sure that people get the most out of it. But we also realize that sometimes, the people that this is being sold to are, or the dealers, the dealers that this is being sold to are generally, they're on like a higher level than like kind of your regular end user who kind of runs into Walmart and like grabs a little $60 whatever router off the shelf there. And so they know what they're doing. And sometimes, they need to do port forwarding for, a camera system, things like that. So we made sure we have that in there. Something else to bear in mind, transmit power has always been a big selling point for Luxul. We always talk about, 1 watt. You guys maybe have heard that for our 4-hour access points. These are not 1 watt, but they are fairly high. I mean, we're talking about 630 milliwatts and 740 milliwatts on the 2.4, and then on the 5 gigahertz in that second number. Most of the other mesh systems out there, the numbers that we've been able to find are 250 milliwatts or below. So that the numbers that they advertise themselves. So in general, I would expect you to get more coverage out of one mesh node, one of our mesh nodes versus one of theirs. Maybe 1.5 times the coverage, maybe a little less than that, just again, depending on environment, things like that. But it's definitely a big selling point to be able to say, hey, you can get more done with fewer of these, right? One of the last things, I guess, that we kind of had from our, focus group, whatever you want to call it, when we talked about all of this, putting out a mesh unit, we had a lot of people say, hey, I want to have the ability to do my 2.4 gigahertz and my 5 gigahertz SSIDs to be named differently. I know a lot of people don't like to do it that way, and if you don't, that's completely fine. When you set everything up, I think they will by default be named the same. You can go and change them if you want. If not, leave them named the same. You'll be good to go. But for those of you who, or for those who might want to make sure that those are named differently, you have that option. This is something that, as far as I can tell, most other mesh systems do not allow this. There's maybe a few out there. I'm sure, like Ruckus with their version of or their sort of way of running mesh. I'm sure that they allow this, but many of the other mesh systems that we kind of looked at do not do this. So there is something to bear in mind, that probably the reason that they don't do this is that when you name those two SSIDs different, it actually turns off the fast roaming and then the band steering. Now, fast roaming and band steering are two things that come with the mesh chipset, and so they just kind of, basically any mesh system that you run, they're all going to have those two things, fast roaming and band steering. And the idea is, it's not active roaming, but it is, the idea is supposed to try to help you when you're moving from one node to the other, to try to stay connected as best you can. Band steering focuses on keeping you connected between 2.4 and 5 gigahertz, or switching you between the two, rather. So bear in mind, there is perhaps a little bit of a disadvantage there. Fast roaming, a lot of times, I don't notice in sort of smaller networks, kind of a residential environment. Fast roaming, I won't get into the whole spiel. Fast roaming was kind of designed as a completely lost the word. Super large networks, right? Where you're talking about thousands of users on a handful of access points, and they're moving around. And what happens in those situations is the access point doesn't actually handle when devices connect or disconnect, not entirely. It actually kind of offloads that onto a different piece of equipment. So just something to bear in mind. Those two things do get turned off when you change the 2.4 and 5 gigahertz SSIDs. Otherwise, they'll be on and working as intended. No problems there. Okay. And that's just on that, when you go to set it up, that at the very top, you'll see primary network, and then same SSID, you just toggle that to off if you want to name them your 2.4 and your 5 gigahertz different, and you'll be good to go. A few last couple things here on mesh, and then I'll open it up for mesh questions, if that's okay with Lee. I'm sure he's taken a few of those, and then we'll talk about ProWatch after that. So I'll just pull these up. So one of the things that comes up, how many connected clients. So we say it's about comparable to our XAP 810, which is tested at 84, I think, 84 clients per radio, so per band, 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. Now, also recognize that that's a tested number, kind of in a lab of fake connections that aren't really passing any data. So that number a lot of times isn't even when you get it from pretty much any manufacturer, it's not always the most helpful thing to know. But it does tell you, hey, this is rated at 84, whereas like our 1510 is rated at 128 per band. So you know that the 1510 is going to handle more traffic and things like that. So just when it comes to level of traffic it can handle, pretty comparable to our XAP 810. Okay. We'll have ProWatch Plus built into it. We'll be talking about ProWatch here in a minute. I know for those of you that or your customers that router limits has been a big deal, or any sort of content management, the ability for the homeowner to say, or the business owner or whatever to say, hey, I don't want people on my network to be able to do this. I don't want them to be able to, access adult websites or whatever, watch YouTube all day while they're supposed to be working, things like that. We do that through a partnership with Router Limits. It's built into all of our other routers. They're sort of software. Excuse me, but we were not able to get it into the firmware of the mesh unit kind of in time for it to launch, and we didn't want to hold it up anymore. So this is something we're working with them on and trying to get that integrated for any of you who might have used that. Different purchasing options of the mesh node or our mesh system. We have our single node MSRP price listed at $285. This is you can buy it and use it as, this can be the single router. You can buy it as an additional satellite node to a system that you already bought. Maybe you just need a little bit more coverage. You can also buy this in the kit. This is a 2 nodes in a box, MSRP at $550. Something I maybe meant to touch on that I might have, I guess, sort of glossed over. Every single one of these units is literally exactly the same as every single other one. Okay, so when I talk about, you can use this as a single router solution. When you set up your mesh nodes, the first one you set up in the system is always going to go into a router mode. It's always going to act as a router. So keep that in mind and be aware of that. But then the rest that you add in are just going to be nodes. They're not going to function as routers as well. That would cause a lot of problems and not be a good thing. So you can literally go and buy a bunch of different of the MK10s and just say, hey, I know that we got a few, this job coming up or that job coming up. For those of you at Capital Sales, you can sell these in any way that is necessary for your customer. If they want to, if they want to get a bunch of MK10 kits, they can pull them apart, use them at different jobs. It literally does not matter how these get used. The only difference is, I believe that they save a little bit of money on the MK10 kit. So just, it's not a huge difference, but if it's something that you're going to have a few different jobs, you guys as the dealers, if you're going to have a few different jobs coming up where you're going to want to use these, might be smart just to, hey, I think I'm going to need 6 or 8 or 10 total. I'm just going to buy the kits and we'll use, distribute 4 here, 6 here, whatever the number is. Okay. With that, before we move on to ProWatch, Lee, do we have any questions about mesh or anything that's come in that maybe we need to go over or recover?
You sure do, Ryan. Let's take just a few minutes here and then you can move on to ProWatch. If you could talk just briefly about the LAN ports again. One of the questions is, can you use both the LAN ports at the same time?
Yeah, answer to that is yes. So whether you are using this as as your router node or as the mesh node, you can use both. They are both active and both totally usable.
Fantastic. Okay, big question here. Is there an outdoor version yet?
As of right now, no. This is actually a question that we've got, I think, way more often than we thought that we were going to get. Like this was one of the things we didn't realize that people were going to want or care about. I know some people are, I know you can get sort of, weatherproof kind of outdoor boxes. I don't really know how well some of those work. As of right now, it's not something that we have. It may be something that we look to in the future as to kind of expand this this lineup to allow that. Now, right now, I know what a lot of people are doing because, to be honest, it doesn't matter that much. If you can get a cable at least to that outdoor unit, you can just use like our XAP 1440, and sort of it won't. You'll have to set it up separately, but you can give it the same name, give it the same SSID. It's not quite as seamless as if they were all one single system like that, but that is a solution for now if you have that need.
Okay. The orientation for the nodes, their tabletop, is this an issue, especially with items from the competition?
So in most of them as well, they kind of have the same type of thing. You can't because their backhaul is, and for the same reason, because the backhaul radio is set up, uh, it's designed in a very, very particular way. So they prefer that you have the same orientation. And I don't know, I know that like Eero has a like a ceiling mount kit, but if you think about that, when you're ceiling mounting it, it's just flipped the other direction. It's still horizontal. It's just flipped the other direction. So that's still fine, which is also why, you know, we are working on a ceiling mount kit, trying to figure out a way to make that work. That's still fine. The main thing here is that you cannot mount these on a wall because it affects the way that they, if I've got a 2-story home and I've got a couple of mesh nodes, maybe in the bottom floor and 1 or 2, you know, a couple in the top floor as well. If I set them up horizontal, that signal doesn't penetrate through the floor as well. So, or vertical rather. So if I mount it on a wall, it will not penetrate through the ceiling, or yeah, through the ceiling of that first floor as well, and get up to those second floor units the way that it's supposed to. So they're always going to be in a horizontal orientation. And I don't. The only ones I can think of, I know that like Ubiquiti had this sort of weird like wall plug outlet that had this big antenna on it. So I guess that didn't really have, it had one orientation because you plugged it into an outlet, and then the antenna was kind of movable. So that's the only one I know of that maybe doesn't have that limitation, but I mean, it's a big ugly thing on the wall, right? So that's one of the ones I know of that doesn't, but most of them have kind of the similar type of thing. They're not going to want you wall mounting.
Okay. Next question is about construction materials and wireless penetration. What are there any issues with sheetrock, stone, plaster, concrete? What's the any kind of issues with penetration, getting, you know, the mesh network up and running?
I mean, yeah, you know, in so much as, you know, those things are all, especially when we talk about, you know, concrete and stone, those things are big Wi-Fi blockers. So it's something to keep. It's definitely something to keep in mind that if you've got, I don't know when you would have this, but if there's one wall in this house and the whole wall is like this huge stone wall or a big concrete wall, there's Wi-Fi in general in that area is going to be really, really tough because it's not just the backhaul between these nodes, it's any other Wi-Fi signal is going to get blocked hard by that. So that's sort of, you know, you try to sprinkle these around so that maybe, you know, if that one wall is running, you know, east, west, whatever, if you can set up, try to set up your mesh nodes so that they're not directly trying to pass through that wall, or you're able to kind of get the signal around it. That's just a limitation of Wi-Fi in general. So that's something to think about. We also do have our, I'll talk about a little bit at the end, but our customer assurance program, our design service, if you're feeling a little uncomfortable or you're not sure about it, any time that you're not sure about what to install, how to install it, whatever, reach out to our sales team, our inside sales team. They can help you either get a design or give you the recommendations of, okay, here's what I think, you know, you've got me your floor plan. Here's what I think if if you place them here, and here, if you can do that, you should get the coverage that you need. So yeah, certainly a good consideration to have.
Okay. let's see, we've got a few more here. Is there any scenario that you can use an access point with mesh nodes?
So you can, like I said, like I mentioned a few minutes ago with the outdoor unit, I can put one of these mesh nodes up. I can connect an access point to it through a PoE switch or PoE injector, and I can just set up the access point with the same SSID, same password, all that stuff. They just don't have. They're not going to function as if they're not mesh connected to each other, so they don't have that sort of self-healing, self-organizing state, and you're not going to have any sort of roam assist, because you're not going to have fast roaming. You're not going to have our active roaming, as the mesh nodes can't work with the controller that we have. So you can do it, and I've, like I said, there's a few situations, especially with the outdoor, where I've definitely seen people do that, and that's kind of been, it's worked well. In general, if you're talking about indoor units, it's like, you kind of want to choose, are you going to do mesh, or are you going to kind of do a traditional system and do all APs? You kind of want to go one way or the other, so as not to confuse the issue.
Okay, I've got a couple more, and then I'll probably hold some till the end here.
No worries.
Is there, do you know of any reliability issues using URC MX Home Pro remote controls, or maybe anything that's kind of wireless that would be using the mesh to communicate?
Yeah, none that I'm aware of. I know, like URC in particular, I know that we sent their training team has some of our mesh units. I know that when it comes to those kind of wireless remote controls, you really want to make sure that they have a strong signal strength. So I guess the consideration that I would have for that is make sure that, try to have a mesh unit in that room, so that remote control always has a good signal strength and is always, wherever you're going to use it, right? And if it's something that's going to move around, it's always going to be a little tough, just because you're moving it around. And this is a thing with some of those kind of wireless remotes, when you move them around, they just have really, what's the word I want to use to not be mean? Cost-effective Wi-Fi chips. So they're not very good at losing a signal and reacquiring a signal. So bear that in mind. If it's something that you can keep it in one room and you can have a mesh node in that room to give it a really good, strong signal strength, it won't try to move anywhere else. That's probably the best thing that you can do.
Okay, I'm going to combine a question here, and then we should move on a bit.
Perfect.
What are the best practices if placed in an equipment cabinet, and can this be used with any router?
So I guess I'll tackle the first or the second question first. Something to keep in mind and is that when you put in a mesh system, the first unit that you install is always going to turn into a router. It's always going to function as a router. It will also do the wireless, and that's, it's just a little wireless router at that point. I would definitely not recommend putting a different router in a system where you're going to use mesh. If you do that, what you're going to end up with is, hey, say you go out, you buy the ABR 5000, all right, our kind of high-end wired router. You go out, you buy that, you put it in, you connect that up to the modem, and then you connect your mesh system up to that 5000. You actually have two different networks, and you have two different routers. It's going to cause confusion. So again, you kind of have to decide: do I use sort of a more traditional system, or do I use a mesh system? And you're going to kind of pick one way or the other. If you have a very particular use case for that, let us know. Reach out to sales@luxul.com, and let's get on the phone and talk about exactly what it is you're trying to do, and see if we can work out a way to make it work. As far as best practice for putting inside sort of an equipment cabinet, it's Wi-Fi, so make sure that whatever it is that you're placing it in or placing it around isn't going to be, again, if you've got like a big steel safe and you put one of these in there, it's probably not going to work that great as far as propagating Wi-Fi outside of that steel safe. So, the same things that you would do with a regular access point. Just bear in mind that, hey, if I place this here, it's literally going to be behind the refrigerator. That's not a good thing. So, mostly the same type of things that you'll worry about on regular access points. We also have our own version of remote management and monitoring. If you've used Oversee or you've used Domotes in the past, a company that we've partnered with, continue to kind of support. But we realized pretty quickly that we needed to have our own kind of version of remote management monitoring, something that was within our control. We could control the feature set, and maybe importantly, we can control sort of the price. Okay. The idea here is that you don't have to open up any security holes in your network to be able to monitor or to manage devices on your network. So you shouldn't have to do any port forwarding, to log into your access points and change the Wi-Fi password, right? For one of your customers. You can always do a VPN. That's always been an option in the past, but those can get kind of complicated. You start dealing with DDNS and stuff like that. Some of those services aren't free, so it's just something that ProWatch and having a cloud run management service really makes things a lot simpler, and that you don't really have to do anything. You just have to provision your network with ProWatch. I'll talk a little bit about some of the ways that you do that, or some of the ways that ProWatch can help you depending upon what you have in your network there. The nice thing is this is also kind of backwards compatible. This is something that's new within the last few months, is when we really started launching this thing off the ground. But if you have one of our Epic series routers, so the XWR3150, the ABR or XBR4500, or the ABR 5000, it's just a firmware update, and then you can run ProWatch on that system and see everything within that system. So you can drive up, park in your customer's driveway, connect to their Wi-Fi network, run the update, provision the system, and get all that out and get that all done fairly simply without really bothering anybody, if that's a concern for you. So some of the features, things that I really like to keep in mind is that, or one of the things that I really like is that not only is this, there is a mobile app, iOS and Android. If you have a tablet, like an iPad, you can do that on there as well, have a little bit bigger screen. But I really, really like the fact that we have a web application. There's the ability for, if you want to do things, if I'm at my office at home, I really like to do stuff on the computer. It's a lot faster for me. It's a little easier of an interface for me to deal with. It's a bigger screen for me to look at. So I really like that we kind of have all of those options. Some of the things that you get with ProWatch, you get the ability to run firmware updates on devices that we have the APIs for, things that pull firmware from the cloud, and that you don't have to have a file on your computer to run that firmware update. Really, really nice option there. Obviously, remote reboots using via PoE, or if you have intelligent PDU and intelligent power there. Another really big selling point. Lots and lots of stuff. If you're using managed switches, there are so many different bits of information and things that you can utilize as well. So something pretty important probably to go over is some of the definitions, some of the terms you might hear us kind of use when it comes to ProWatch. Okay, and probably the main three is there's ProWatch, there's ProWatch Plus, and there's ProWatch Integrated. Okay, so I'll go through each of those. Essentially, ProWatch is kind of the management or management and monitoring of an individual device. This is built into a handful of devices, basically our access points and our controller. There really isn't anything else. Now, if you have a system that does not have a Luxul router, which is kind of the key to one of the main arguments for a complete system monitoring, we'll talk about that in the next slide here. If you don't have a Luxul router, you don't have a way to run ProWatch Plus, which again we'll talk about in a moment, you can at least have the ability to monitor those access points on the system, that controller, go in and change a password, things like that. So you at least can have that option. This is also going to be a given within the mesh product as well. So something else to bear in mind is kind of we were talking about earlier is that the ProWatch stuff is coming for mesh. So then what's ProWatch Plus? Okay, so ProWatch Plus gives you the ability to monitor everything on the network. Doesn't matter what brand it is. If it is a network device, you'll be able to see whether it's online or offline. And then depending on what the device is, you should be able to do a whole lot more than that. If it has any sort of web user interface, so you would log in using the web browser and the IP address, you will be able to do that remotely and do all the things as if you were there on site. Really, really cool thing. You can kind of compare this if you're familiar with Oversee Pro, if that's something that you've used or have known in the past, or if you've used Domotes. This is sort of what ProWatch Plus is. Kind of gives you the entire system management. That's baked into the Epic series routers. And then maybe I should have a little asterisk there on mesh that is coming in a future firmware update. I don't have an ETA right now, but it's something that we are working on to try to get done. So again, those Epic series routers are the 3150, the wireless one, the 4500, and the 5000 routers. All of those three. The only other term that you might hear, and you'll probably won't hear it as much, ProWatch integrated, is essentially network devices which we're able to pull more information from directly through ProWatch, and we can give you a little bit more functionality directly through ProWatch rather than having you have to go and log into them each individually. So for instance, like a managed switch, you will be able to go into ProWatch and just click on I think it's called the port status or port overview, and you can see everything on every single port on the switch. If it knows what's connected to if there's a device connected to which ports have devices connected to them, and then you'll be able to actually just reboot anything that's PoE. There's just a little PoE reboot that you can click there, and it turns the PoE off on that port, turns it back on. Pretty cool deal. Similar type of thing with like the Middle Atlantic or our PDUs. Similar type of thing. You don't have to log in to go and do a remote reboot on something. You can just do it directly from the ProWatch app. Something to note here is that this does require that, like I mentioned in the previous slide, these devices do require that you have ProWatch Plus running on a Luxul router on that site. They unfortunately do not have the ability to just be monitored on their own if you don't have ProWatch Plus running on that site already. Okay. I'm not going to go through too much more here, time-wise and everything, but essentially, this is sort of your landing dashboard for ProWatch when you get into a site. And the idea here is that you're really only 2 or maybe 3 screens away from anything that you need to do. If you want to see all the devices, obviously there's the devices tag. From there, you would just click on which device you want more information about. And then, there's a login button right there if you needed to log into that piece, things like that. We've really tried to keep this simple, tried to make sure that the user interface is intuitive and, you're not spending a lot of time digging through submenus that are 7 or 8 or 9 layers deep. So that's ProWatch. That's pretty much all that I had. I know that there were a few other questions. And so if, any other questions that have come in or anything else that we want to make sure that we answer.
Okay, Ryan, I've got a few questions that were left over from Epic Mesh, and then I'll have a few questions on ProWatch. From Epic Mesh, need a bit of clarification here. Can the mesh system be used in conjunction with existing Luxul AP system to extend Wi-Fi to a new remote area without Ethernet, or is it intended to be standalone?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's definitely intended to be a standalone system. Um, the way the way that I would probably think of this is you need to kind of make a decision. I guess it's sort of at the beginning of the process. Am I going to use a mesh system, or am I going to go with like standard APs? And you really have to stick to one or the other. And the part of the reason for that is that I believe I mentioned earlier, if when you're setting up the mesh system, the first one that you set up always gets set up as a router. So what you're doing, if you're in that situation, you already have a system set up. You've got your other access points are all hardwired. They're done. They're all figured out. The customers expanded their home, or maybe there's an area that they finished their basement. Now they want to make sure that they have coverage down there or something like that. Um, if you add mesh to that system, you already have a router. You're adding another router into the system, and uh, it starts to cause some confusion. So you definitely, if you're already working with a hardwired system, um, you know, if you can get wired to those additional locations, please do. That's definitely the best. Just use the standard APs. We also have a repeater option. So if you're there's one room that just doesn't quite get the coverage, or that one little area that doesn't quite get the coverage, you could go with that repeater option is the P40, if that fits your need, but it definitely won't cover as much of an area. So bear that in mind, and it's not going to work exactly the same as like the mesh solution.
Okay. On the Epic Mesh again, are there auto security updates, or does the customer need to update the app periodically?
So is the question asking about well, I'll just answer. If you're asking about the mesh nodes, which is probably I assume is what it is.
The MN10s.
Yeah, that'd be my guess. Yeah, we're never going to push automatic updates. We just simply because when you start pushing updates to devices that people maybe don't know are being updated, you're opening a can of worms. What if the update's bad? Things like that. So there is in the same way you could update through ProWatch, but we have those updates are all available through the cloud. They do get pulled down from the cloud, so it's a pretty quick process. It would be for an update of the MN10s, you couldn't use the app for it. You would have to either log in or do it through ProWatch. Would probably be the easiest way there.
Okay, let's move on to ProWatch. Can you name the products again that would be out there that can gain ProWatch through an update? What were the routers?
Yeah, the XWR 3150, the ABR and XBR 4500, and the ABR 5000.
Okay.
If you ever hear any of us say the Epic series routers, it's the Epic 3, 4, and 5. Is kind of, so when we say Epic series routers, we're kind of using that as like a shorthand notation. So those are the ones that we mean.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about PDUs and cycling PDUs?
Yeah.
The various versions of PDUs.
Yeah. So PDUs are, probably most of if for whatever reason you've never worked with one, don't know what it is. It's basically an ability for you to have a power outlet that's connected to your network. Okay. And what that allows you to do is do things like, hey, I've got this, let's say a cable box that I know, once in a while, this cable box is just going to kind of lock up, I guess is sort of the colloquial term we can throw out there. And it just doesn't work. And it's, maybe your customer calls and talks to you about this, or maybe this is something that you hear from, friend or family member, things like this. That probably the only thing that needs to happen there is that device just needs to be rebooted. But you don't want to, if it's certainly if it's a customer you're talking to, you don't want to be like, oh, just unplug it, plug it back in. PDUs kind of give you the ability to remotely power cycle a power outlet that has something plugged into it. So something that maybe doesn't live on the network entirely. Most cable boxes don't actually have an IP address on the network. They either work through like a coaxial network or something like that. So you don't really have an easy way to remotely reboot them. A PDU kind of gives you the probably to do that. The other thing that most PDUs do is they also give you, some level of surge protection. But probably the main thing, the big thing that you take away there is the ability to remotely log into that PDU, or using ProWatch, go in, find which outlet is it that this particular thing, whether it could be a network switch, it could be a router or a modem, it could be anything. Wherever this thing is plugged in, I'm going to turn the power off to that outlet, and then turn it back on in a few seconds. Or in most cases, like with ours, you'll have a sort of a reset button where it'll turn the power off for, I think it's 12 seconds, and then it turns the power back on after that. So if you had, say, a modem and or a router plugged in, obviously you don't want to just turn it off, because then you've lost access to that site forever, until somebody turns it back on. So basically you can set it up so that it will turn the power off, turn it back on if you needed to reboot the router, the modem, the cable box, whatever it is. Really, really powerful tool. Definitely something that if you don't have it kind of in your arsenal, or haven't been using it, it's definitely something to look into. And we do have a few different models of those as well.
Okay. Last question I have here is, are there costs associated with ProWatch Plus and ProWatch Integrated?
No. So it's one of the big selling points of ProWatch is obviously it's a really robust, dynamic, usable, feature set, and the user friendliness and all of that. But the same could be said of Domos, who we have partnered with and continue to partner with for a long time. They have a really, really great product. They do. But I know that the sticking point for a lot of people was, hey, I don't want to pay the whatever it is, $10 a month or whatever per site. So we offer ProWatch in any form, whether it's just the standard ProWatch because all you're using is the access points, or if it's ProWatch Plus, is a completely free service. All you have to do is make an account, and provision your sites.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much, Ryan. And thank you everyone for logging in. Please feel free to contact Luxul or Capital Sales for more information.